Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the Agile for Agilists Podcast, the series made by Agile enthusiasts for Agile enthusiasts. And now for your hosts, Drew Bodwall and Brad Nelson.
Hello, I am Joan Gammon. I'm an Agile coach, and today we're going to talk about the real metrics that matter.
Oh, I like that. I really like that. So what do you mean by when you say real metrics? Because I love how you put that.
So when I talk about metrics as an Agile coach, the organizations that I work with, they want to know, story points delivered or all of these quantitative metrics. But I think what's really important, I'm an Agile coach and I'm on the people side of Agile. Our teams are the ones that are doing the work. They're the closest to it. They know what's going on. And if a team is a happy, empowered team, they're going to be able to deliver value for the organization, not how many story points they deliver, because I can deliver however many story points you want, right? You want 100 story points a sprint? I can do it, right? You want 20? I can do that, whatever. But how the teams are feeling and how they feel that the organization values them, those are the metrics that really matter, in my opinion.
I agree. I fully agree. And I love that we just kind of went straight to the heart, right dead center in the heart of the topic. Yeah, I think a lot of companies overlook that. They really, all they care about is, as you said, is how many story points are being delivered. And it's a total fallacy. One, we had this fantastic episode last year where we talked about, remember, Brad, story point estimation versus no estimates.
Yeah.
Right. Up until that call, I was a very pro story point person, not as like a performance metric, but as a common shared language between the team to be able to help guide them towards better ways of working and collaboration. And, I was converted. So
saved your Agile soul.
Yeah. And people have always said when they've come onto the podcast, the most important metric is how close you're leaning into the camera while you're on a call with somebody versus how far you are laid back. What are some ways that you've seen that measured?
Right now, I work with an organization that does an assessment for team health, they call it. And it's asking the team members, not just let's get into Jira, let's get into Rally and see what your metrics are, but how do you feel like you're doing? Are you happy? Are you enabled? Do you collaborate successfully as a team? Do your leaders actually remove impediments for you? If you have barriers, what is the cause of those barriers? Those types of things. So you got to go straight to the source, right? You got to ask the teams. And then you have to trust. You have to create an environment where the teams can be honest about their answers. I have seen lots of organizations do assessments, but it doesn't come from a place of psychological safety for the teams. And so I see it a lot, especially with contractors. Nope, everything's great. Everything's perfect. Our leaders are perfect. Our environment is perfect. Things couldn't be better, right? Because of the fear behind it.
One of the questions should be blink twice if you're under duress.
Right. But if you create a safe space for those teams and you ask the questions and you neither reward or punish based on the answers that they provide, and you use it merely just with any metric, I believe metrics are an opportunity for a conversation. That's all they should be, an opportunity for a conversation.
I love that.
And so if you use these qualitative metrics in the same way, it's just an opportunity for a conversation. That's when you're going to figure out what's impeding our teams, what's making our teams unhappy, fix that, and then happy teams deliver value. And that's how it works.
It's an interesting conundrum because if there isn't psychological safety, they're not going to say there isn't psychological safety.
Exactly.
It's like you either have everything's great, everything's not good, which then it's like, okay, these guys obviously have psychological safety, or everything's great again, even with psychological safety. And sometimes it can be pretty tricky to understand or to read between the lines.
I found in those situations where you can just look at the results and have a pretty good hypothesis about what's going on. Like oftentimes you'll see scores that are higher from an assessment perspective all across the team. And that gives you the cue to be able to ask the question, right? Like normally when we've run these assessments before in the past, other teams, have scored significantly lower when they're at this level of experience. They've done this many iterations or whatever that is. Do you feel like you guys were inflating your scores? And then why or why not? How will that serve you? How does that serve against you? So it does still create that opportunity for discussion.
For sure.
What has been your involvement with these kinds of things, Brad? Have you used these kinds of qualitative and, as I call them, soft metrics?
Qualitative and quantitative metrics, as far as agility is concerned, we have used them. We call them assessments. We've called them health checks, which is a little bit more friendly way of saying assessment, because you don't want people to feel like you're judging or grading them. I worked with vendors that use them as well. There was one very, very popular Agile vendor that used to use a base camp system is what they called it. They've since moved away, I'm told. But at the organization I was at, it was used as a grade. Why are you only at this base camp? Even though it might not make sense for your team to be doing some of these more advanced things. We've definitely done them, but I think what I tend to see the most is more of the am I adhering to a framework or not type assessment, which I don't find a lot of value in personally.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I was actually thinking about that aspect of things before we got on this call earlier this afternoon. And, one of the things where I am right now, what we value is not the methodology that we're adopting, but the outcome of lean agile mindset. And the goal is business agility, to be able to respond to change, shifting market conditions, technological advances. So an assessment to gauge whether or not you're using a framework or a methodology correctly is useless. Are we doing the steps? Okay, we're doing the steps. But are you getting value from the steps?
Right. There's also the Dunning-Kruger effect I find a lot. Like that was always the challenge as a consultant is is it a self-assessment? Well, they don't know what they don't know. And they don't know what good looks like. You see that a lot with juniors. You see a lot with Scrum Masters, especially when they're starting out. They're like, I'm killing it. I'm doing everything and I got all this free time. There's nothing else to do. And it's like, okay, well, in the Scrum Master instance, if you're applying Scrum, you've given service to the team. What about your product owner? What about the organization? What are you doing there? Right? And these things get overlooked because they're harder, I think, is ultimately the answer.
Yeah. And I'll tell you a trend that I see, and you mentioned Scrum Masters. I see, we call them check the box Scrum Masters, right? The methodology tells me that this is what I need to do. These are the ceremonies I need to facilitate. This is what I need to do with my Jira board, whatever. And I've done these things. I check the box. So I'm a good Scrum Master because I'm doing exactly what is told. But because those things don't often, sometimes they're not seen as delivering value, then the Scrum Master role gets devalued because it's not bringing as much value. And then you see the people who are hired into those roles not have those more advanced skills or some of those more non-check the box activities, more strategic, more supportive, more product focused, those types of things. Then the salary shrinks, the roles shrink, and then you end up seeing, well, we don't really need Scrum Masters because they're glorified admins, basically, like they're the team admin, and we can just take those tasks and spatter them across the other members of the team. So we can eliminate the entire role because they're not proving that value up front by doing the exact things you're talking about, by not doing just the check the box activities.
Yeah, I call them the Scrum Police. They're here to police whether or not you're following the rules or the laws of the land. Yeah, good way to alienate people.
There's a great Yiddish idiom, and I don't know how to say it in Yiddish, but it's to a worm in horseradish, the world is horseradish, meaning that's all they know. And there's a lot of Scrum Masters that experience that. Maybe they've been at one company before, or even developers on a team or POs. This is the way we did it there. And so this must be the right way to do it. And so I'm great at doing it. And, that's kind of dangerous when you think about that. You should always be stepping into that growth mindset, no matter how experienced you are, because there's always something to learn.
Yeah, it's a very precarious situation that I think most of us have probably experienced and struggled with because confidence sells. If you're confident, you're going to be listened to. That's what people pick up on. And you're most confident when you know the least. The more you start to learn, the more you question yourself. And that is essentially Dunning-Kruger's effect, right? Is like, I'm going to be the most confident that I know it all when there's very little to know. And as time goes on, I'm going to start questioning myself. And I was just reading an article about a podcast that did this like thing with kids where they had someone fake being a professional and someone who was actually a professional. And they had to guess which one was the fake professional. But the fake ones, all they had was confidence. So they just sold the kids on confidence. And every single time they picked the fake one. And I feel like that is our agile industry. And that is like every leader, every PMO office, like every single time you're trying to get a job as an agilist, the fake, for lack of better words, professional is the one that's selling.
That's bleak, man.
I think that's across the board. That's not just in the agile world. That's across the board.
Sure.
Yeah. And I also feel like that's it's a generalization, not always the truth.
Right.
But often is.
Yeah, that's fair. I think with agile, it tends to be harder. Well, one, it's close to me. I notice it more because it affects me more. But I do think it's harder because back to the assessment point is that it's not just actions. I don't just do these things. My late great friend used to say that a CSM was just waving the Scrum guide over someone's head and tapping them on the shoulders and boom, you're a Scrum Master. It's not that simple. And a lot of the time, like agile delivery correlates to the traditional delivery models that we had. And in the traditional delivery models that we tend to see, it is all knowledge-based. They have a book of knowledge. And so you just have to acquire this knowledge, do these things, check these boxes, and you're going to deliver successfully every time. And in Agile, it's not as simple as saying, I can recite the Scrum Guide.
Yeah, I liked, Drew, you were talking earlier about outcomes. We are constantly preaching outcomes versus outputs. So when you're checking the box, these are outputs, but you're really striving for those outcomes. So if we have people who are agilists and they're wondering, okay, well, how do I get to the next level? Like, how do I stop being a check the box and just following the instructions and do more? I think that's the answer lies in outcomes versus output. And a lot of times, unfortunately, our agilists are also having to teach the leaders of organizations that outcomes are more important than output.
Definitely.
And I'm glad you brought that up because, assessments don't necessarily need to stop at the team level. There's definitely assessments that could be used to assess agility and collaboration and leadership, the senior-most leadership levels.
Yeah. So this is, you're touching on something that is near and dear to my heart because I have been working with agile teams for many years and organizations that are in the process of going through their transformation, right? I've even heard leaders say, like, when are we going to be done with this transformation? like it's a project, you start and you end and you check all the boxes in between and voila, we're transformed. But what I see in these organizations is how do we make our teams faster, better? And they're constantly trying to squeeze as much productivity as they can out of the teams. But when we go to the leaders and say, well, we would like to assess the work that you're doing to prepare the work for the teams.
Whoa, wait a minute.
We don't get as much buy-in there. Don't get as much buy-in there because you've got this entire funnel and you're really trying to squeeze as much productivity as you can out of the very end of the funnel. But it's hard to get leaders to focus at the top of the funnel where they're the ones who can influence what happens at the bottom.
Yeah. And when they do lean into that, it's really magical.
It's magical.
When they
exactly.
carve out the space to look inwards at themselves and be a part of things, it's just the best, right? Like, so
I'd agree. I think leaders are the most important part. I think the rest follow suit.
I used to have a coworker that said servant leadership to the teams means my leader is going to remove impediments from me. They're going to empower me. They're going to ask me to help with the solutioning. But from a leader's perspective, servant leadership means I'm the leader and you're the servants.
Yeah. I don't know that we've talked about this before on the podcast, but it's something that's come up thematically for me elsewhere. One of the trends that I am starting to see is transformation approaches flipping upside down, where business agility is what's introduced first, as opposed to Scrum at the Scrum team layer. And I've seen that in quite a few places where that works well. And I mean, it doesn't discount that maybe, well, the teams were already starting as well, and some consultant came in, or the executive wound up going to a conference and heard somebody speak and was like, oh, I'm interested. But I'm seeing a lot more movement in that direction than I've ever seen, which is really like gives me tremendous amounts of hope for our industry and the world.
Yeah. Enterprise level business agility.
Yeah.
Is how companies get to exactly what you're talking about. There's a shift in the market, we can pivot. We have all of the organization aligned to be able to work that way. We're not organized by who reports to who. We're organized by the value that we deliver.
Yep.
From what I've seen, a lot of the times, someone at the C-suite went to a conference or read a CIO article or something, and they're like, we need to bring this in. So they are supportive, and then the teams are on board, and it's everyone in between them, the sandwich of leadership, where it just gets lost, I think, in the chaos and the busyness of corporate life there. I think that is what we have to figure out in the coming years, is how do we get middle management? First of all, I hate the word middle management. Entry-level management is usually what we're saying. We say middle management. What I mean here when I say middle management is everyone between your first line leader all the way up to the C-suite. That sandwich of directors and VPs or whatever titles you use, those are usually the ones that I find are the furthest away from embracing any of this.
Yeah, I'm reflecting back to Roche Pharmaceutical. Their story of their transformation towards business agility is just amazing when you think about it, that they're like a global organization, and the ability to pivot in the way that they did with customer centricity at the heart of everything is really magical. So if you guys haven't read up on that, I would definitely check that out, because for me, it was one of the things that validated that I'm doing the right thing. This is actually going on in the industry at this scale, then we're doing something right.
Did they go into how they're getting buy-in at that sort of middle layer that, Brad, you were talking about, above the teams but below the C-suite?
At this point, it's been so long since I attended and saw them speak in that conference, and I just remember there were tears in my eyes at one point. I was just like, it's just so amazed, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
So I'm very empathetic to that middle level, because that level, they have achieved quite a bit of success in their career to get there, right? They have paid their dues. They have experienced a lot of things to get there, but they essentially learned a formula for how they got there. And so then Agile comes along and says, we want to change all the old school ways that you managed and how you found such success into doing it a different way. And that's not easy for any of us.
Yeah, there's muscle memory, for lack of better words. The new way works until it hits the fans, and we just need to get it done, and then you always revert back. That's common. I definitely sympathize too, and that was actually where I wanted to go, because I do realize I feel like I'm being extra critical today. Maybe that's my mood, but I'm not blaming these people for being that way. That's not who I am. That's not the point. Like, when we think of this leadership layer, it is often the layer that has the least psychological safety. It's very cutthroat up there. There's only one way to move up, and that's if someone gets blamed for a failed initiative and gets sent out the door. So they're always competing with each other for budgets and for headcount and all of these things. There's not great psychological safety at that level. And then furthermore, I guess just want to touch on as well, how I mentioned like the scrum masters that don't know what they don't know. You can't blame someone for that. Right? And same with the leaders. You can't blame them for not knowing. And the challenge is, how do you teach someone that doesn't know what they don't know, which is what I think you were bringing up, Joan.
I think the psychological safety aspect there, like I like to talk about improvement items and impediments as an object that we're just taking off the shelf to examine. We're just talking about a thing. And people are so invested in their things that it's hard for them to not hear opportunities as criticism.
And that even goes up to the C-suite. A lot of my best stories I talk about that I openly share is my time at Meyer. I think it's been long enough. But my CTO used to be a COO. And so to him, it financially made sense to move to Agile. And the finances were taken care of almost first thing, which is like the only time that's ever happened. It was really great. But he used to have forums where he would just talk openly with people. And even he was talking about how he can only push so hard, so fast. One of my experiences as a leader is your reputation is like a currency, and you earn reputation by, working with people and getting buy-in, and you can't spend that faster than you earn it. Otherwise you're going to get the boot. And it's the same at the C-suite level. You push too hard, too fast, and it's not pliable enough up there, right? You're going to get bounced right out the door.
I think that's a really important point. That the competition level and the parameters within which you have to operate, especially if you're, let's say, a publicly traded company, those parameters get tighter and tighter.
Mm-hmm.
Your margin of error has to be much smaller, and your mistakes are much more costly than at the team levels.
Yeah, that's another thing that Drew's probably sick of me talking about by now is how the C-suite and senior executives are in a different business than the rest of the business. They're in the stock market business, for lack of better words. Like a CEO is hired by the board. Board members are elected by shareholders. 71%, I believe, of shareholders are investment firms for 401ks and stock market. And their whole business is getting a return on stocks. And so the people they hire are going to promise to help their business. And so it's really challenging, I think, for a publicly traded CEO, C-suite, a top executive to focus on something like an agile transformation or what's best. How do we get better at delivering the widget when my leadership doesn't really talk about that and they don't really care about that?
Yeah, not to mention, how are you a good servant leader, or how can you be a good servant leader when serving down could be career suicide to us, depending on your board.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've brought up Meyer many times as a great example. They're a Fortune 500 company. They're still privately owned. And so I remember being there and being like, wow, they invest a lot in this or that. I wonder how that differs in a publicly traded company, because I hadn't worked at one at one point. And I definitely miss it because they were willing to invest in things that they knew weren't necessarily, like, we didn't quite get it right. We know, but we know there's some great learning here, and something's going to come out of this project or this experiment that's going to potentially shape the future for us. And so having that grace to experiment, I think, is just so unique and so awesome that we don't really see in publicly traded companies.
So do you guys see an assessment as a tool to help influence executive leadership to lean into the transformation, or is that the secondary component that follows up once you've created? Like, we talked about how the more likely response is, oh, we hired you to go assess those people here, not us. So is it a tool that helps to break down that misconception, or is it the secondary action after that barrier has been broken down?
I think if done correctly, I don't think I'm answering your question, by the way, but here's my answer anyway. I think if done correctly, if the psychological safety is there, if the conversation afterwards is a meaningful conversation and not just a check the box activity, I think it's an opportunity for leaders to hear the very clear voice of their teams, which is typically filtered before it gets to them. So I think it's a great opportunity for leaders to find out exactly what is happening at the delivery level of their organization.
So then you think it works well if it's a bottom-up assessment that then provides information that creates that segue then to, hey, we have an assessment that you could take as well.
So I'm not answering your question, but I think it depends on.
Are you doing it maliciously?
I think it depends on the ultimate goal. I think if there's a leader who is trying to accomplish certain things and is struggling, then it's important to hear from the teams to understand what they need to do in order to accomplish their goals. I think that can lead to the leaders themselves saying, tell me more. If you're an open leader and you have that opportunity, then I think, okay, how are we doing at our level to help you and to prepare you, which would lead them to an assessment for their behaviors at the portfolio level, the program level, whatever that could be.
I would say similarly, it can. I had a client that we got buy-in from leadership that they never saw the answers. They only saw the results. And so that was one way we tried to create psychological safety for the teams, that they could answer how they needed to. And they would know someone on the team voted this way, but they only saw the averages anyway of the answers. I do think it can work. I will say I'm really not a fan of assessments anymore. I went from becoming a huge fan early on in my career to now just seeing how tricky of a tool it is to leverage well, that it's kind of like story points with me, Drew. Right? Like they bring value. I recognize that there's value in assessments and health checks. It can help you, especially because we get caught up in just being busy and trying to get our work done, to look at it and say like, look, you have improved as a team. I also think it's a great tool to kind of almost checklist. What are some of these important things that I want this team to think about that I might not necessarily get a podium otherwise? And look, it's so important. It's in our assessment. We're going to be looking at your maturity level in this and to see how well you are embracing this idea or this concept. I do think that gets people thinking about it a little bit more. And, as a consultant, one of the challenges often is, how do you prove your worth? How do you prove to leadership that they're getting their money's worth by having you there? And so an assessment is one of probably the best tools for that, especially with closed-minded leaders, to be able to show, look, here's the progress. Now it can be gamed. It can be gamed really easily, which is one of the problems with it. But there is value in all of those things. And I think that you can use it as like a traditional change management tool. So in traditional change management, the whole focus is, how do I get evangelists, and how do I get those evangelists to create a tidal wave that like washes away the resistors? So I think it's a good way to be able to go to other areas and be like, look, these teams have improved by leveraging this framework, or, these agile practices or beliefs, or, and that's enough to maybe sell them and get them on board. But I think at the end of the day, you're going to reach a point where it's no longer going to do more good than harm. And it's something that I've been reflecting on a lot too, because I saw this question on LinkedIn. It was like, is it better to be efficient or effective? And it's like, can you be both? I love efficiency. I'm a lean guy. I naturally I almost get like a high when I'm helping people be more efficient. But one of the things I've had to realize with that is, it doesn't matter how efficient you are. If you're not selling, you're not making more money. At the end of the day, you still have to deliver value.
So, I do see assessments in some regard as reading tea leaves because, it takes people to kind of understand patterns and whatnot. But, from my experience in them, if they're facilitated in the right way, if there's structure around the team seeing their results and a conversation is facilitated that asks the team, what are they noticing? What are the patterns that they're noticing, as opposed to the facilitator reading the tea leaves and, saying, I see moving back to waterfall in your future. That it's just like everything else in coaching, right? If it's their idea, if it's their observation, their idea, and their solution, then they're more likely to step into action with great energy to see it through. But like an assessment for the sake of like, all right, here's everybody's PDF, now get back to work. There's no value in that, right? There's like really no value in that.
Yeah. I would say like my assessment to me is more, I guess I've been leaning more towards the lean change. Ken and Jason have infected me with the LCM bug. But it goes back to lean and Kaizen, and it's have the team identify their areas for improvement. Where are they struggling and how might we address that? To me is more valuable, exactly for the point that you're saying, Drew, is that when they're bringing it up, it's important to them. They're already bought in. There's no resistance. And I can help shape that conversation as a senior, as a consultant, as a scrum master, or a lead of whatever kind. People will naturally ask your opinion. Now, the challenge is not always giving them your opinion. That's very hard for me. It'd be like, well, what do you think? But there are times where you can kind of shape that direction. And I usually do it through questions. I'm like, well, did you think about this? Or what happens when this happens? So I kind of challenge them to kind of like nudge them in the direction I think is best for them. And I think there's just so much more success in that route. And it's so much less disruptive to their way of working than trying to force a framework on someone.
I've said over and over that Todd said, framework is a methodology or framework is a great place to start. It's a horrible place to end. Mm-hmm. Purpose for everything shouldn't be to implement the framework. It should be the outcomes that you get by implementing the framework. And if you need to break some of the rules to be able to get there, then that should be okay if you're talking about it, evaluating it, understanding it, and coming to a consensus, and then coming back to it and inspecting, adapting on that decision later on down the line to make sure that that decision still is effective, right? Like you can't expect, like you said earlier, Joan, when you step into a transformation, you're now stepping into an eternal transformation. Market conditions aren't suddenly going to freeze, and technology development is suddenly going to pause or stop or slow down. It's just going to keep on rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling. And so in order to remain competitive and be able to respond to change, you have to recognize that you're investing in your business and the people within your business in order to stay nimble, agile, competitive, whatever word you want to use. But there's definitely no end to this. There can't be.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Change is the only constant in our lives. All we know is change. And yet for some reason, like we try to just not change. We try to do the opposite. It's quite bizarre.
Well, I think traditionally the pace and rate of change has enabled transformations to have a start and a stop, because you could theoretically spend a year transforming and then stop and stay that way for like 5 years and then do it all again, or 10 years or whatever. You're going to get stagnant and stale for a little bit. But the rate of change back in the 80s and the 90s was like nowhere near as fast as it is today.
I think that's why I'm definitely in the pro assessment camp. And primarily because for a lot of our organizations, they have this goal and they are just hammering towards that goal. And an assessment, part of the inspect and adapt, allows them to stop focusing on delivery for a little bit and really focus on how are we doing this? How are we interacting? How are we interacting with the other teams with whom we have dependencies? How are we interacting with each other? How are we interacting with leadership? All of those things. So for me, especially while they're in this sort of mid-transformation, if you will, meaning the organization, not the teams, I think assessments are a really important opportunity to stop and have those conversations, because otherwise the conversations fall second to the delivery dates or the deliveries.
Well, I think the biggest fallacy right now is that, like Brad, what you were talking about is the C-suite operates based on the stock market, right? Spreadsheets and budgets as a way to become more profitable and show profitability is no longer going to work. Very quickly, it just won't work at all, because the companies that aren't focused on the spreadsheets and are really thinking about product-led organizations and customer centricity, they're going to make the competition so tight that's just not going to work anymore.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, actually. I think that there is, well, I agree with you, Drew, a millionfold that companies need to put down Excel first and foremost. It's shocking how many Fortune 500 enterprises are still running in Excel as one of their top tools. But that aside, I do think, and I do agree with you, Joan, that getting leaders to stop and think and not just constantly act, that is, I think, the challenge and the magical move is, how can I get you to just stop for a second? Because they're very reactive. Where I see more effectiveness is when I can tie those things to whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. How can I help you to increase adoption of your tool or signups or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish? Where I see these sorts of assessments kind of struggle, and it's not just the assessment, it's coaches, it's scrum masters, it's whoever, is when they focus too much on the discipline. They focus too much on this big A, Agile, and these organizations don't want to go into the business of selling Agile. They're in the business of whatever they're in. They want to know how to do the thing they're doing better, faster, safer, whatever it is. And so I guess that's my caveat, is that when speaking with leaders, you lose them if you're not speaking their language and if you're not talking about what they care about.
Yeah, I think that's key for even at the team level to understand what are the things that's keeping our CEO up at night? What are the things that our CEO is trying to accomplish? And ensure that the work that we're doing aligns with organizational goals versus just somebody on a 3-year plan 3 years ago said we were going to deliver this product. Is it even still valuable, viable? Do customers even want it? It's important for not only for the CEO to understand what it's like at the team level. I think the teams have to keep thinking, is the work that I'm doing, the outcomes that I'm helping produce, in line with what the organization deems its priority, which is why it's so important to be nimble and agile, little a, because that changes.
When you're going into an organization, Joan, do you have a go-to question for yourself to kind of on the spot assess, like, okay, where are they at?
So my brain immediately went to my go-to question when I'm being interviewed, because that's what I ask when I'm being interviewed. What keeps you up at night? I go to the CIO. What keeps you up at night? Because that's the North Star, right? And it may change, but that's what everyone needs to be driving towards, is accomplishing what's going to keep the company relevant in the future. What's going to help that organizational leader meet their goals. I think often we see teams get, I don't want to say caught up on things that are important at the team level, but don't necessarily drive those larger goals, which is why that enterprise business agility that you were talking about, Drew, is so important, because it helps align those senior level or high level goals all the way down to the work that the team is doing. And it incorporates marketing and finance and legal, all of the people who are necessary to help achieve those goals. It helps align them so that they can be more nimble. They can work together. You cut down some of those barriers and impediments.
Governance pieces that are put in place to ensure profitability, prevent early maturity or ones that haven't even stepped onto the treadmill yet, teams from working on things that weren't funded, that weren't approved by however many tiers up.
Mm-hmm.
But the part that's missing is that by the time it gets to the team to work on, is it still valuable? Do we still need to build all of it or some of it? Does the team have enough of the questions answered from an architectural perspective, from a value business why perspective, in order for them to figure out, should we be working on this or not? And so the real waste there is that with all the governance that often is in place to make sure that the people who have their hands on the shovels are working on building the things efficiently and effectively, actually cause it to not be built efficiently or effectively. So it's a real conundrum when you think about it that way, right? Like,
Definitely.
the thing you have right now ensures bad efficiency, productivity, whatever bad word you want to use. Why wouldn't you be interested in talking about a model that allows for value to flow through your system and have higher value, innovation flow through your system?
It's a scaling problem, right? As a startup, you don't have that sort of governance. You don't have those policies. And as you scale, there's a reason for all of them. People don't just like making rules and policies for the sake of it. There was a reason, there was a concern. And I think that's the biggest problem that we have is we're trying to teach larger organizations how to be startups again.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way of looking at it. I would also say that oftentimes the reason why those policies were put into place were so long ago that nobody knows why anymore, and they're just doing it.
Also true.
Like the doctor's office bell experiment, where they're standing up every time the bell rings, but nobody knows why. So
it was all just an experiment.
But I also think a lot of these organizations are, I hesitate to use the word trapped, but trapped in their legacy structures. And those structures came with certain expectations. So, for example, we have, in a lot of companies, you'll see technology is on one side and the business is on the other side, and they report to different people, or product. Let's use product as the example. They report to different people, and those leaders may have differing objectives. And then that trickles down to people who are all on the same team and are supposed to be working towards a singular goal. I think that's part of it. And I also think that legacy had expectations for product to say, tell us exactly what you want us to build, and we in IT will build that thing for you. And trying to get companies to understand that letting IT help solve those problems for a product can create some of those efficiencies, right? Because IT understands maybe a better way of delivering it or a better way of creating this thing that's going to have longevity versus you telling us specifically how to build it. So I think a lot of the legacy structure and expectations are what's impeding. I mean, a lot of these companies need large scale reorganizations, and that's tough and it's expensive.
Totally.
Yeah.
I have a working theory that these organizations perpetuate this. It feeds into itself. And some of it I know from research, like we tend to attract and hire and keep employed the same types of people. And that's part of our natural tribalism as human beings. And my working theory is that a lot of these old organizations, these enterprises, these companies that have been around 50, 60, 100, 200 years in the case of something like Colgate, they have people who cut their teeth in the enterprise world. So they learned this is what the enterprise world is like, and that's all they know. And so they just bounce from enterprise to enterprise. And so it's the norm to them. And I see the same thing in big tech where a lot of these major companies hire directly out of college. And so the people have no experience. And you have to essentially be a college graduate to even want to work at these companies, the way they run you into the ground and stuff. But then, so those people only ever learn this is what it's like at big tech. So this must be the way it needs to be done.
Yeah.
And so I think we glorify big tech. I think we glorify Fortune 500 companies when in reality, they're in this like sad inception of perpetuating their own struggle.
So in thinking about assessments again, some of our listeners are scrum masters, some are coaches. Hopefully we've got some senior leadership and product management and whatnot listening. But let's think about the scrum master for a second. That's like working in that organization that doesn't fully get it yet. Assessments are a tool that they could then use to show the evidence. These are the impediments that we are experiencing. Hopefully one of these you're interested in helping us with, hopefully all of them you're willing to help us with. But how do you think that a scrum master could on their own volition implement that within a single scrum team as an experiment, maybe to see what they get?
Well, I think that's certainly a worthy cause. I think it's difficult in I like the way you put it, Brad. They don't know what they don't know. So for them to create some sort of assessment to assess their team, they're going to assess their team on the things that they know about. Whereas if you're using an external industry standard, it's going to serve two purposes. It's going to help assess in all of the areas, but it's also educational because it's going to open their eyes to things that maybe they hadn't considered before. So I don't have a good answer to your question.
I mean, I agree with you that, again, the worm and horseradish, right? You're not going to be able to create an assessment on your own if everything's horseradish. So I like the suggestion of going out and looking for an assessment. I think there's scrum masters who are that worm that don't know what it's like, but then there's scrum masters, like I know this happened to me so much early in my career, where I was more mature than the organization that I am now working for.
That doesn't happen to you anymore?
That's a good point. But I guess so the maturity gap was so much so that, I'm like locked in a cellophane bag or something like that without too much wiggle room. And I really feel like if I had an assessment back then, just like say to my team, what do you guys think about this? Would you guys be interested in taking this assessment as an experiment to see what we learn about ourselves? Would you be interested in that? That, one would probably create some insight for the team, but would also create some ammunition, right, in the form of impediments that are hopefully well stated as impediments for the scrum master then to take up to maybe it's a program manager because they're a single scrum team working on projects in a program or something like that. That might help a program start to pivot towards Agile.
Yeah, agreed. And go a step further, if they can influence to have all of the teams within that program take a similar assessment, that provides the program leaders, RTE, whatever that role is at the program level, to be able to look across the teams and say, what are the similarities? So that if I have, let's say I've got 6, 7 teams in an art or in a train or whatever you want to call it, in a program that they're working together, and 4 of those teams say that they're having issues getting test data or whatever. Like, I know as a program leader, I can help influence this one thing that's going to positively affect 4 of the teams with whom I'm working. So I think it's a great opportunity to show that sort of forward thinking and provide those leaders with information that maybe they're getting it piecemeal, maybe they're not getting it all. Maybe it's being filtered before it gets to them.
I feel like that's almost more beneficial is when you can scale the assessment, because then it's not just, oh, this one team sucks, right? Like, I know some leaders kind of feel that way. Like, why is this team not doing this or that? But when you're able to show it's an organizational challenge, that should be a trigger for leadership to get involved.
Yeah, I still think the MVP there is one team.
Yeah.
Let's start with one team before we try to convince all the other Scrum Masters to bring this. Unless you've got the line of sight, then go for it.
I did have a question on that, though. So you mentioned looking out into the industry to see what is an industry standard assessment. From my knowledge, and I could just not know, most assessments are created by consultants or consulting firms or someone who's trying to sell you coaching, which you may need at that point, and that may be the right move. However, a lot of organizations aren't just going to jump into writing a check before they even get to the tool, especially in today's market. So are either of you aware of an industry standard assessment that someone can just pull from to kind of learn and see?
I've seen a few out there that really are agnostic to any framework or methodology. And I think that's what's really important. It's what you're talking about with an assessment are what are the proven behaviors of high performing teams and how do we gauge where we are on that. It's not to say that that's the only pathway to maturity is to move towards the proven behaviors of one high maturity team or maybe a handful because it was based off of a wide range of knowledge. But that's what you're really looking for is something that can assess your team's behavior in regards to a lean agile mindset and the habits that they've created or have not yet developed within their agility.
And I would add to that, for me, the assessment is a part of it, but the importance of the assessment is the conversation it drives. So there could be certain things in a more broad spectrum assessment where the team says, we've never talked about that. Right? That's an opportunity for a conversation. Or we scored really low there. That's an opportunity for a conversation. Or we scored really high there. That's an opportunity for I think it's just creates the opportunity to have a candid conversation among the team members. But I would also caution, and this is the thing, Brad, that you were saying earlier, some of the assessments out there are not in general, what's the overall health of the team, but how well does the team adhere to this or that framework or methodology or whatever? So I think it's difficult. You have to be very discerning to make sure that it's not, yes, we're having these ceremonies, yes, we're planning this way or whatever. And it's more around behaviors as opposed to box checking.
Do you have some examples, putting you on the spot, of what some good qualitative questions might be?
So I think it's important to cover a broad spectrum of the things that are important to a team. So we talk about leaders, we talk about ceremonies and agile practices, we talk about how the work is funneled into the team, how the team is empowered, how the team collaborates with each other. I think that there are a lot of aspects beyond just, you talk about retrospectives, beyond just what went well, what didn't go well, what do we want to change for it? There's a lot more to it. I would think all of those things, the interactions with other teams, how are dependencies handled?
In that regard, these kinds of questions also help teams realize that the things that maybe they didn't feel like they could talk about before or ask about before, dependencies, testing, we just accept that that's the way it is, that it enables them to start talking about that because it sets the tone and levels the playing field in that regard, which can still be escalated and denied. You could theoretically take an assessment, realize that you guys need to install some different services or systems as part of your CI/CD pipeline, and it could be denied. We don't have time for that right now, and we're not going to do it. The well-seasoned Scrum Master is able to take that impediment, though, word it in the right way so that the person that they're escalating it to is forced to either accept it as is or take ownership of it. And nobody wants to put into an email, on this day, April 10th, I have decided that we're not going to do this thing. I know I'm being a little dramatic, but That's the real art, is being able to take the output of a retro or an inspect and adapt event or an assessment or anything like that, and be able to frame it and deliver it in a way where it cannot be ignored and a decision has to be made.
I've often helped teams build a business case for whatever impediment they're struggling with. Once again, put it in leadership's words and their language. What is the language of leadership? Money, money, money. Right? So how do I translate this impediment to money for you and build a business case? And if I can't build a business case for it, is it really an impediment? Is it really worth fixing?
To go back to what we originally started talking about is sort of the soft questions, or the soft metrics rather. I think an assessment is also an opportunity to compare your hard metrics and your soft metrics, meaning you can ask questions or you can pull from the work tracking tool, do they have a healthy backlog, based on what we're getting from those specific quantitative metrics. But then on the qualitative side, you can ask the team, like, do you have a clear roadmap, and how far back does it get? Because often what you'll see is they may contradict. Because if you have hard metrics, and depending on the leaders above that, you may have leaders that says your numbers are off here, fix it. Whereas qualitatively, it's hard for the team to go, oh yeah, we have a very clear roadmap that stretches back, whatever. It's they do or they don't, right? So I think that's another argument for the assessments.
One of the questions that I've seen frequently that I always love is, do you have a clear understanding of the product vision, or do you have a clear understanding of the corporate North Star, or whatever, fill in the blank? It's just such a great question. There are teams of just contractors who feel like they don't deserve that. And there's internal managers of those contractors who feel like they don't need that to do their job because they have a contract with that vendor or whatnot. And how can they do what they're doing if they don't understand the greater purpose of what they're trying to build and how it fits in? So
yeah, and I would argue, how can they deliver the most value if they don't have an opportunity to provide input into how they're delivering that value? If they're just, we're delivering what was told, the way we were told to do it, within the time frame we were told to do it, that's limiting the value that they can contribute back to the organization.
Yeah, that's crappy. I've seen that. It's just a really crappy circumstance where here are the tools, here's how we want you to do it, and here's the work that we want you to do. It's been solutioned already. Just go build it. And it's not the right tools. It's not the best process. And that work has got big, huge gaping holes in the solution. And there's nothing in there about the why.
Yeah. I usually like to be a little bit more direct, Drew, and say, why does this team exist? Why are you here? Why do you have a job? Why does this company pay you? Right? Like, these are all things that contribute to, like, what is it that we do day in and day out? What is the value we're chasing? I think that's important. And then I usually follow up with, who's your customer? And then, when's the last time you spoke to your customer? How often do you speak to your customer? None of these questions so far have been like, how many story points, or do you have stand-ups or anything like that? Because those aren't inherently valuable. Where is the value at? And that's the conversation I want to have. And then my delivery question that I go to is, how often do you push to production? Because everything else has to line up in order for you to continuously deliver.
To be fair, like, how fair is it to ask a team that question who does not have the authority to actually change the answers to those questions? There are some teams who do. I mean, they're kind of aggressive questions, Brad.
They are. Yeah, I got you leaning back. But you know what? I'm getting to the bottom of it. And we can have pointed questions. Now, my goal isn't to make you feel bad. If you tell me, I don't know, for any of those questions, that's a valuable answer to me.
But it might not open the recipient's eyes in the way that you're hoping it would.
Maybe not.
It might just cause them to no longer trust you.
Well, to my knowledge, that hasn't happened yet. But at the same point, you know, if I have a consultant who doesn't know why they're doing the thing they're doing and they don't care and they're just like, just feed me work, do I care? That's not the type of highly motivated people that we want to build teams around. And that's not to say there isn't a place for them and that there isn't work for them. Sure, there is. But if my job is to build high performing teams, then that's not the type of work we're doing.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the approach that I would take there is I would already know that they haven't ever spoken to their customer directly. I would know that they're not connected to the vision. And instead, I'd be working with leadership and asking questions about, how do you think it impacts this team and your bottom line that they're not connected to their customers at all?
Well, I would also say you have to know your audience. Like, I'm not just walking up to some person on the street and being like, why do you have a job? Right? Like, I'm not Bobsing it. So what is it that you do here? But I do think that sometimes we sugarcoat things too much and it's lost. And especially as we move into more of a global setting where there are language barriers, the more you try to sugarcoat it, the less people are understanding you.
But I think the questions that you're asking the team, I agree with both of you. I think the questions that you're asking the teams, they're very pointed questions. But if the team's response is, I don't know, or we haven't had that opportunity, then that's immediately where you start talking to the leaders and say, okay, why does this team exist?
Yeah.
How are you maximizing the value that this team can bring? Because every engineer I've ever worked with has been really smart. They're in the position that they're in because they're really smart. And I have yet to meet one that wants to be just in order. Well, I take that back. I have met one or two, but
For the most
of them don't want to be order takers, right? They want to solve problems. That's why they get into the business. And so let them help the organization solve the problems.
And I think you touched on it too, is it's what you do with that answer and that information after that. We're not in the business of blaming people. It's not who messed up, it's what needs to be improved. And in that instance, if, to your point, Joan, if they don't know, it's not the person's fault that they don't know. They weren't told. So then it's like, okay, well, let me go to the leadership team and ask them, hey, what is this team trying to achieve? What value are they adding?
Yeah. And then you're getting into culture.
Yeah.
Which we could talk for hours on culture.
Oh, Drew doesn't like culture.
I love culture. I wish I could talk about it with more people.
Drew's Mr. Culture. If you're new to the podcast, that is Drew's coaching stance is culture.
Culture. What is it? The fun culture coach? Is that?
We'll run with it.
Well, look, we've been talking for quite a bit about this. I think we've got some really good information here. I think that there's lots of insight that we've provided from different directions, facets, angles. If we're going to wrap this up, what last comments do you want to add to this? What things maybe did you wish you said earlier, or last minute gems of wisdom, Joan?
I think it's just, we are, to your point, we're in a world where change happens very quickly. And I have a leader in my life who says it's no longer the big companies eating the small. It's the small, fast companies that are taking over everything. They're the ones who are winning. And I think we have to, especially those of us who are in the working world in the 80s and the 90s, it has changed so dramatically that it's important that at all levels of the organization, from the teams all the way up, that we try to focus on being able to change quickly and be nimble like that. And Agile gives us a method to do that. Business agility, not just Agile capital A, but little a, Agile, is we all have to adopt that mindset, or somebody faster and more nimble will.
Yeah, for every company out there that isn't, there's a dozen more that are. What about you, Brad?
I feel like we bounced around a bit on this episode. I guess the thing that I think kind of boiling on my mind is something that I think Joan has kind of brought up over and over again, is when you're looking to do an assessment, what is the outcome that you're looking to get out of it? And I would take that even a step further, and organizationally, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve with your agile transformation or adoption or these new behaviors or whatever it is you're trying to do? We can't all be Google. We can't all be Amazon, and that's okay. I think about DHH posted an article earlier where he was talking about how there's only so many pro football players and there's only so many pro technology companies. It's okay if your technology company isn't big leagues, but it's not okay to expect your unexperienced, untrained, less mature people to perform at that level then. And so you have to decide what is the level that you're looking for and that you're comfortable with, fits within your means, your ability to pay people, so on and so forth. So I guess that's kind of my takeaway, my last thought when it comes to these sorts of assessments.
For me, what stuck out, and I didn't actually share this while we were talking, but Joan, when you said it's about the conversation. I realized that an assessment is just a tool to stimulate conversation. Much like a talking stick is a tool to stimulate conversation, right? And if you look at it in that degree of simplicity, that the purpose is to just have a conversation together in a structured way that enables us to be introspective and gain insight and clarity to who we are and what we might want to do about that and where we want to move next or what we want to focus on next. That in and of itself is, to me, the value of an assessment. If you can get that out of it, even with just a talking stick, which you probably could, then do it, because it's the conversations that matter. In fact, somebody should start a company that has assessments and just call it talking stick.
Talking stick. Just don't beat people with it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I enjoyed this. Joan, I know we've talked about this for a while, so I'm glad that we finally got it on tape. And that's how old,
evidence that we actually talked.
Evidence. Yeah.
I love
digital evidence.
I love how, Brad, you say we're kind of all over the place with this conversation, because that's literally, my brain works like a pinball machine. And so you're like, if I was in this conversation, that's exactly what happened.
Oh, it's the same. It's all connected. It's hard to focus on one topic when it's all connected, for sure.
I love it. Well, I've had a wonderful time. I could talk about this stuff all day.
Very cool.
Thank you. It's nice meeting you, Joan. It's been enjoyable for me too.